welcome to this What's New in version v7.4 of GLOBEClaritas, which was released in June of 2022. There are four major themes to What's New in GLOBEClaritas for the version 7.4 release. They are updates to the Claritas launcher, so we're using a new graphics framework, which is PyQt, to give improved, updated and modernized UI for the launcher. Similarly, we've carried out a project to improve the UI for the Claritas job flow editor, again using a more modern Qt graphics interface. And then we have a new AI-based FBQC and Repick application, which I will demonstrate and has already been demonstrated in a short video that's available on our YouTube site, as well as some updates to the Tomo3D application, which I will discuss as well. So firstly, I'm going to just give you an overview of the improvements to the Claritas launcher. Moving to the Qt graphics gives us a more modern interface, and so whilst the look and feel will be similar to the old UI, because we've gone for an evolutionary, not revolutionary approach to the update, we have tried to clean the interface up, make it less complex, make the tabs a little bit more around commonly used applications rather than lots of applications or all the applications that would be based around that tab. Also, we've tried to rationalize a little bit by removing some of the tabs that weren't really necessary, probably rarely visited or only had one or so applications listed on them. So for instance, you'll see that the miscellaneous and admin tabs are gone because they're better housed, the applications or things that we want to visit there, in the tools or utilities drop-down menus. Similarly, the wavelet tab has gone because it only encompassed the wavelet application, and we've removed the wavelet application to the seismic data tab because generally you are dealing with seismic data. It may only be a file field signature or some other part of it, but it is still seismic data, so it fits quite nicely on the seismic data tab. So with the Claritas application, the launcher, basically we have information around what project we're looking at on that top banner, the version of the software we're running, whether it's a production or a beta version. And we also have a button by the Claritas logo, which tells us what project we're currently on. But if we click on that, launches a Qt application that allows us to select another project. And then we've moved the tabs themselves from being down the right-hand side of the launcher to being down the left-hand side. And we now have, and we've slightly changed the order. So now we have job flows, then projects, seismic data, geometry, velocity, statics, and help being the last tab at the bottom. And then the help tab has been rationalized because it now just really encompasses the button to access the HTML manuals for the software or the modules, the release notes, the segue header names, part of the manual, the YouTube channel, and the email in a bug report, effectively. The other parts of the help system that were previously on the tab can now be accessed under the tools menu and the help button, so that gives access to the text-based documentation rather than the HTML-based one. So as you see, if we click on the job flows thing, there's a lot fewer buttons on the job flows tab because we've moved a lot of these things like the text editors onto either the tools menu, so editors, or under utils job flows, so list of comments on Claritas job flow or apps job flows. In these drop-down menus as well, all the applications that exist on the tab will also be there, either under apps or utils, depending on whether they're an application or a utility. So you can access them in two ways. Similarly for projects, we've kept the mainly used aspects of the project tab there, and then moved some up onto the utils menu so that they can be accessed by that. Similarly, seismic data, which is one of our busier tabs, has the key applications there with others available via the seismic data apps menu or the utils seismic data apps menu. Similarly for geometry, velocities and statics. In addition, we've created the capability to create a user's favorites tab. So how do you do that is basically on any of these tabs, if you go to an application, right mouse button, click on that application and click on add to favorites. You'll see there's now a favorites tab up here which has job editor to start with. I could also add in view seismic. So again, I've got job editor, view seismic. I could go up to the utils menu, and if I decided that the SegD, the QSegD application was something I used a lot, I can right mouse button click on that and add that as well. So I have that in the favorites tab as well. Should I change my mind and decide that I no longer require that application on the tab, I just right mouse button click and select remove from favorites. So we feel that's quite a good improvement in functionality. It means that you as a user get to sort of slightly condition the launcher to your preferences rather than using our pre-configured options. So if there are things that you're always using, you can put them on your favorites tab and have easier or simpler access to those applications. And for instance, things like tools, so the admin menu now gives us access to the license key application, etc. User preferences, we can edit the user preferences around the launcher. So if I pull that up, bring that across, you can see that it gives us access to what style of help we use, browser, etc., and what browser we would currently set to Firefox. So everything's relatively easy to find. There will be things that aren't where, if you're an existing Claritas user, that are no longer where they were in terms of tabs. Either the tab itself will have gone, or the application is considered something that's infrequently used, so is better housed in the apps or utils drop-down menus. But we look forward to your feedback. If you feel that there's something we've removed from the tab that should still be there and you use it regularly and you'd like it back, then certainly if you let us know, we can consider returning something to the tab as a button rather than being housed in the apps or utils menu. So similarly with the Claritas job flow editor, we've sort of tried to move away from the old X11 based application we had to a new Qt based application, which is called job editor and can be found on the job flows button, or in this case I've added it to my favorites directory tab. So I click on job editor and select a suitable job flow. So in this case I will take the add job. So as you can see, the job flow editor, again, it's an evolutionary approach to the update rather than a revolutionary. So again, across the top banner, we can see the path name and the name of the job file we're editing. We've got some drop-down menus for files, so the save, exit options, as well as preferences, change job, so I move to a different job, view the last log file, or quit and discard any change that I've made. So if I click on the preferences first to show you that, so that allows you to add some additional bits and pieces to the job flow. So I can add things like comment and restore buttons to the ones that are currently displayed, although we felt when we did the review and renewal of the application that the comment and restore buttons were less frequently used than previously. Module descriptions, do we want to display them or not? We can turn those on and off basically by selecting yes or no on this preferences form. Tab, how the tab keyboard button works, cycle between fields, or which is the default, or the legacy behavior from the previous job flow editor where it's sort of file name completion or option to cycle down through a selection of options, and similarly for the escape key and the F11 key. So I'll click OK on that. Utils allows you to list support files, update all modules or toggle module descriptions on and off. Help allows job editor documentation or process module documentation. We have a here which defines the job file that we're working on and the project that we're working under. We click on the job file name, we can select a different job file to view, but I'm not going to do that at the moment. If I click on the job file as it's a button, it will bring up a selection widget, would allow me to select a different job flow if I wanted to, but I'm not going to do that at the moment. And as you can see, basically we've swapped the orientation around. So whereas before we'd had our list of modules on the left-hand side and our buttons on the right-hand side, again, because it seems more natural to work from left to right, we've got our buttons now on the left-hand side. We've obviously decided that we don't need the comment restore buttons, so they've been moved off of there, but can be reinstated if the user desired. So at the moment we have add include, so we have add from a list of modules, the list of modules within the software. We have include to copy and paste from another job flow. We have copy, cut and paste. They are grayed out initially until we click and select a module, and then the copy and cut buttons become live. A run button, the JCS button to switch on JCS functionality, and the parameters button, which allows us to update some parameters for the job flows itself. So if again I click on the parameters button, see that brings up a little widget with some options in there around list of modules to link in, libraries, debug, modules we want to debug, log file versioning off or on, other compiler switches we want to use, produce runtime statistics, yes or no, etc. So those sort of things there. Click OK on that to leave it as it is. And then we have our modules on that right-hand side of the pane. So if I highlight a module or select a module, then the copy and cut modules become live. If I click on the copy or cut button, the paste button becomes live, and you can see if I click on the paste, then the cursor changes to a plus sign effectively, and if I click somewhere in the job flow modules area, I drop a new module in. And again, if I highlight that, cut it out, then it removes it. But you can see that the copy cut are graying out when there's no live module for them to copy, and paste is live all the while you can have something to paste in, whether it's something you copied or something you cut out of the existing job flow. As before, a double mouse button click on a module opens up the parameter form. Parameter forms are very similar to how they were previously. Again, we've got the buttons down the left-hand side, help, OK, and update. If I click update, it will update an individual module. If I click up the top there, you've got the name of the module and the module description. If I click on the button that says the module description, it allows me to interact with the parameter form to update the module description I've got in there, but I'll leave like that, for instance. So it gives me a little box where I can type in my own description if I want to. File name, list file name. So we've got standard file selection icons there, information button there, edit button there, and then options to select drop down menu, pad missing, so parameters, and again much like this, give us options to toggle between the different options from drop downs, or where we're selecting from trace header names, it'll give us a full list of all the trace headers within the data set. You can also see there buttons to go up, left or right, so this effectively cycles up and down the processing flow. So if I click on that, it'll take me to the next module in the job flow, which in this case is geometry or add geom. And again, I can look at that. So now, rather than having to, on the previous application or the XSJE job flow editor, I'd have to OK, come out, and then double click on the next module I wanted to look at. I can now basically cycle down through the modules and check my parameters as I go. If I come out, it leaves highlighted the last module I was on, which makes life a lot easier to maintain awareness of where you are in the job flow. It's always useful. And then if I right mouse button click on the job flow, it gives me options, further options. So I've got options to add and include, which mimic the buttons. I've got options to disable or enable comment restore things. So if I highlight a model, I can click on disable and comment it out, or enable if it's already commented out to restore it. Flip, copy, cut and paste. So copy, cut and paste obviously mimic the buttons that are there, and flip is, if you like, a combination of the comment and restore buttons that it inverses whatever the state of the module is at this current time. And then we've got options around running, building and submitting to queue down the bottom as well. So again, a simpler interface, a cleaner interface, same functionalities we had previously, and we retain the command line option down here that we can type in something like app for append and range as a module, and it'll drop that module in the bottom. I can go used, and as you can see, there's now another range module on the bottom, and I can cut that out because I don't actually need it. Similarly, if I click on the JCS button, it adds 3 additional buttons, or replaces the run button with 3 additional buttons, and they are set links, where I can confirm that the JCS variables that I've got set up in the job file match correctly with the information in the JCS spreadsheet or the Excel spreadsheet that's used to drive the master job flow and create the child jobs, and if necessary set links between columns in those spreadsheets and the parameters that I've defined in the job flow. An option to actually edit the JCS file should I need to or want to, and then the JCS run button, which then allows me to select the lines from the spreadsheet I want to process and either run them interactively, submit them to a queue, or create a batch script that I can run in the background. Turn that off. So that's pretty much all I want to say about the job flow itself. There's lots of functionality. It's easier to change jobs and select a new job to look at. It's easier to keep track of where you are in the job flow when you're looking at things, and you can toggle back and forwards between different modules within the flow by using the back and forward arrows in the modules themselves. So I think quite a good improvement over what we had previously. The next application we discuss is the new first break QC and Repick application, FBQC. This can be found under the apps menu in statics subdirectory, and click on the first break QC and repicking button. This launches the application, which looks like this. So we've got our 3 different windows. These will be populated by graphs showing how good the application is running. But first we need to select an input data set. Depending on the size of the file, it may take a little while to load. So this application works in an iterative approach. It firstly looks at the seismic data you present it with and quantifies the quality of the traces supplied. So it gives you a measure of the noise in the data and therefore whether it's a good or a bad trace effectively. So we define a window around the first break. We define how much above or below that picked first break we're going to start. We give it the name of a header containing the picked first breaks, and by default this should be the first break time header. As we're starting with noise QC, there'll be no query header to start with, therefore ignore the header low and high. Group size basically tells it how many traces we're going to look at initially to train the AI with to start with, and then we write that measure of the trace quality out into the FBQC noise QC trace header. So if I click on start and run the application and let it do its stuff, when the application is finished, you can see it's populated. The top 2 graphs at the moment is still calculating the last one. So the loss graph basically defines how close to the estimates the data is in terms of the pattern for the AI. So the smaller the value, the better. So you can see it starts off a little rough around the estimates and then improves as we go through the process. The accuracy, if you like, is the inverse, that the smaller the value, the further away it is, the less accurate the model is, the actual data. So what we're looking for is something that's sitting above the 50 percentile marker, typically on the noise QC, which this data is. And then in terms of the graph down the bottom, it's basically displaying the number of picks that are in the higher range means good quality data. So if you've got, so what it says here is we've got a small number of picks with relatively low QC values, and then we've got quite a large number of picks in these higher QC values, which suggests the data is reasonable quality. Once the noise QC process is finished, we can then select pick QC. So this will go through, look at the actual physical picks in that first break time header, and looking at the data in the noise QC measure, decide how good those picks are, whether they're good quality picks or poor quality picks. Again, we're using similar windows. The input trace header remains first break time. We're going to give it a query header first break QC noise. We're going to basically exclude anything below 500 in terms of the header value, low, and read all traces up to the maximum value available. Similar group size for training. We'll click start again and let it run. And the accuracy and loss graphs again show the quality of the data. So the smaller the loss value, the better the application's working. Similarly, the accuracy, the more traces that are showing a higher quality of fit, the better the solution. And again, on this QC histogram, what we're looking for is that we've got more traces in higher values than down in the lower values. So we've got, once we're up about 500, we've got gradually increasing up about sort of up to over 40,000 of the traces between those ranges. So we're getting a lot more traces in that higher value point. So again, if we're happy with that, we can then go from Pick QC to one of the Repick options. So generally, I would suggest using Repick NN. So if you've got reasonable picks and you're just trying to adjust or tweak them, then Repick NN is probably the best one. If you've got data that's difficult to pick valid first breaks on, you can use Repick TF. So you basically pick a rough set of picks or an approximate pick for where the first breaks would be. Repick TF doesn't actually use the seismic data itself. It just works using the geometry information and the existing first breaks to calculate where it thinks, based on the geometry, the first break should be. So if you like, that can give you a better set of approximate picks for the first breaks that can then be fed into the Repick NN process to pick more. So if you've got all data or data where you've got large gaps where data isn't picking very well, then Repick TF can be the way to go. If you've got reasonable quality data, then I would go with Repick NN, which is what I'll use on this data set. Other ways of using this data are you can also basically just stop after the first break QC and noise QC, the Pick QC and noise QC process, and use those as measures of quality around the data itself. So which traces would you exclude from picking because they're noisy and difficult to pick, or which areas do you need to go and look at the seismic, the picks you've already got, and manually adjust or adapt or pick them better if you feel that's the best way of working. So we can use it as just a measure of quality and then use that to inform how we repick certain areas ourselves, or we can use the Repick NN process to basically go through and update and improve those picks for us. So if I click on start again, it'll begin that process of running through the Repick NN using the neural networks to refine and update the first break picks. So now the FBQC is finished, and what we get is basically examples of how far away from the existing shifts with this one down here that the picks were, and therefore the maximum shift applied, and basically a measure of how many traces have had those sort of shifts applied, positive or negative to the existing picks. But you can see that the majority of the picks are clustered around that 0 millisecond mark, so either are unchanged or the changes are quite small. Again, the loss and accuracy define how close to the model actual data is, or the data or the model is to the actual data. So the accuracy and loss are defining how good this process is. We can just leave it there and say those picks are a good improvement on what we already had. Let's use them in our refraction statics analysis, either through RefStat 2D, 3D or Tomo3D, or we can choose to rerun the Repick NN process by selecting the output header from Repick NN as our place where we find our first break picks, and run using the FBQC noise QC as the query header again, and rerun the picks across, click start, and off it would go again. I won't do that again because it looks basically the same as the previous process. For more information and documentation on the application, you can click on the question mark button or search in the Claritas manuals, and I'll show you the document. So click on the question mark, it'll bring up the documentation in your preferred web browser, and so there's a whole information about the different parameters that are available. and then also some description of the possible workflows you could utilize with FBQC should you want to. So there's some good documentation there that can help you with your use of the application. What I will show you lastly is some examples of data with and without the FBQC used on the first break picks, and show you how it can improve the refraction analysis process. So this shows some data from the 3D land tutorial with refraction statics applied. The refraction statics calculated using either the results of first break picking from the standard Claritas auto pickers, which do a good job, but obviously the data's reasonable quality but not the best. There are noisy traces, and so picking sometimes goes a little awry against the results of those picks being fed into the FBQC application and then utilised after FBQC Repick NN using those improved picks into the refraction statics analysis. So this display here is a stack, an inline stack with data created from the original auto-picked first break picks against those coming out of using the first break QC picks. And you can see that the stack is giving an improved response. We've got sharper, more consistent events going from left to right, whereas with without first break QC, certainly this event is sort of fading in and out. The stack response is variable across that event, and below that event there's not a lot to see, whereas if we take the FBQC result, the stack response is more consistent across the inline. We've got information coming through underneath, including down here, so there's a lot more information coming through. So we're seeing an improved result using those updated, improved first break picks. So we can see that they do add value to the processing steps and help us get the best possible image for our data. Worth a try. I would encourage you to take a look at the FBQC application. It can also be used quite effectively for picking water bottoms, automating the pick or improvement of water bottom picks in the data set. So if you need an accurate and consistently picked water bottom, this application can do quite a good job of just taking what can be a rough water bottom pick and tuning it into being quite accurate. So if you're working with high resolution data and you need to develop a static solution based on a smooth water bottom, this application can give you quite an accurate first break pick, water bottom pick for your data, which will feed in to give you the optimal result for that static solution on high resolution marine data sets. And now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the improvements to Tomo3D. So go to the Statics tab, click on Tomo3D. Let's bring up the application. So I'm going to add in picks and geometry, and you can use the best picks coming out of the first break QC in the seismic trace setup. I'm just being quick and simple on this one to show you the application loading. So one of the improvements we've made to in the new release for Tomo3D is the ability to start without a predefined velocity field. So we go to model, accept terms, we can change the model, the area we're going to model using this box here, just pulling up or down to increase or decrease the amount of data we're working on. So we're happy with that, we go to iterate. If I click on the start button with no velocity field, it will come up and prompt to ask if I want to create a 1D velocity model using the information it's got in terms of geometry and first breaks, which I'm going to say yes, and it will go away and create that 1D velocity model, which may be a better approximating to the starting point that we want and give us, therefore, iterate towards the full solution faster. So that's one improvement we've made. The other improvement to Tomo3D in this release is its ability to work with 2D data. So it does basically treat 2D lines as a pseudo 3D, so you do need to bin the data onto a 3D geometry to use Tomo3D with it. And then basically what it will do is create a 3D refraction velocity model based on that input data set, a pseudo 3D. So really good thing to use for crooked lines or lines with a lot of curvature or where they're quite away from straight lines. So that's an option for you to use. And in addition, the initial release went out without Documentation. So we've added documentation to the application now, and this includes some suggestions on workflows, how to troubleshoot the data that you have, and the best way to work with the application. So there's quite a lot in here for you to work with, but hopefully it's all very helpful. But any comments on Tomo3D or the documentation will be gratefully received. And then finally, the only other things I'm going to mention in terms of this release is that the statics applications, so RefStat 2D, 3D, and modules, ResStat and SPStat, now utilize the ViewStatics application to display the statics solutions they're deriving rather than the old ViewShift, so they give a better, certainly for 3D data and for 2D data, a better map view of the seismic, of the statics being applied. So they're a better QC process with that application. And then one final comment I have is that we are changing our versioning numbering for the next release. So we will no longer be going to version 7.5 in the next release. We will basically start using the standard Petrasys naming convention. So our next release will be based on the year it's released, the iteration released in that year. So in this case, it will be 2023.1 because it will be released towards the end of November or January time. So yeah, so we'll be on 23.1. Any questions about this new release? We'd be interested to hear from you and get your feedback. Any requests for improvements or updates to the software going forward, again, always gratefully received. And thank you for your time.